Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Carlson. I'm a partner at Propelics, and I wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Assess the ROI of Your Mobile App Initiatives. I want to do a couple bit of housekeeping before we get started. First of all, we had some questions that came in from the registration forms, which we're going to try to have Larry answered at the end of this webinar. But as the content comes through, if you guys have questions you want to be able to bring forward, there's the QA function within WebEx, or you can use the chat panel as well. I'll be watching that and trying to pulling some stuff together for Larry to answer at the end of the call. And a lot of people always ask if we're going to make a recording and the slides available after this webinar. Like we always do, they will be available later today or early tomorrow with the webinar recording as well as the slides. We try to be able to provide these both for all of our webinars that we've completed, and I think this is our 15th or 16th webinar, and there's probably a good 15 or 16 hours of content on other topics related to enterprise mobile strategy. Before I turn over the webinar to Larry, I just want to do about 60 seconds on Propelics to give folks a little bit of background if you're unsure of who we are. We create mobile strategies and world-class applications for the enterprise. We are 100% focused on mobile for the enterprise, both customer-facing, but more importantly, we feel on the higher value use cases for employees and partners. The partners, as well as our key employees, have 15-year plus track records of providing enterprise-level strategy to Fortune 500 clients. We help build strategies around technology use, but specifically in taking advantage of disruptive technologies like mobile. For the last 6 years or so, we've been working exclusively within mobile, driving valuable use cases to employees and customers and partners of our clients. We're based in San Jose, but we have consultants across North America, and many of our clients in our engagements include a global reach. From a services perspective, we do primarily 3 categories of services. The top area listed here is our largest area of business in terms of being able to drive mobile strategy services that are delivered in a fast-paced workshop type of engagement, sometimes as quickly as a single week. We've built our services and really our Kickstart projects around specific challenges that we've seen repeatedly in discussions with our prospects and what we've seen within our clients. Some of those Kickstarts are listed here, specifically trying to be able to help build a mobile application portfolio for our clients. We do a lot of work in terms of building out a scoping and a plan of a specific mobile application idea. We do a lot of work within IT readiness for mobility, meaning that as a portfolio is being generated, what do we need to do from an IT side to be able to repeatedly and securely create, distribute, and manage these types of applications. And one of the other areas we do a lot of work in is innovation through visualization, meaning that instead of just being able to mobilize a current application or technology, how do we try to be able to move these processes forward a bit and move up the kind of maturity level within there. We also do some mobile advisory services, and these are really structured as block-of-hour type of engagements, allowing your organization to use our people, tools, and processes in more of an ad hoc manner, kind of away from a structured high-momentum building workshop. We also do a lot of speaking engagements, assisting with vendor evaluations and RFP processes, a lot of work in terms of helping organizations with policy definitions and governance. Center of Excellence creation is a big area for us in terms of being able to help define and be able to build one of those, is helping lead those for our clients. And finally, we try to tie all this back to our managed services, where we focus heavily on great user experience and application simplicity, quality, reusable, portable code, and trying to be able to ensure that we are delivering and managing and building a great mobile application support and administration function. With that, I wanted to introduce our speaker, Larry Lauvray. Larry is a partner at Propelics. He has a unique ability to translate product plans into industrial-grade solutions while making sure that the details don't get, quote-unquote, lost in translation. He's used his exceptional analytical abilities to separate hype from reality as he advises companies on execution plans for their product and program roadmaps. Before I turn it over to Larry, and he can walk through the agenda and some of the pieces that we're doing on this call, we did get some good questions that came in, like I mentioned before, and please use the Q&A function or chat function within WebEx to be able to bring some more to me as Larry's speaking. But however, we only have an hour, and so some of these times we might miss your topic. If that's the case, please go to propelics.com/lets-talk, and we can set up a meeting just with you or your team and the same folks from the Propelics team to be able to walk through some of your concerns and some of your questions in detail. And so with that, I will turn the presentation controls over to Larry, and welcome, Larry.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Welcome to our mobile ROI discussion today. So over the past 18 years or so, we've been involved with many initiatives that require a concrete ROI evaluation, either before executive approval and or before the project funding can be allocated, across the many facets. So ERP, CRM, BI, our legacy, our enterprise legacy around similar large-scale initiatives are the same. In those days, the rigor was proportionate to the investment. So sometimes millions or tens of millions of dollars were at stake. Where now, let's enter the world of mobile, specifically enterprise class mobile, where project investments are just a fraction of past enterprise projects. And in the time it used to take for the ROI analysis, today, a mobile app can be conceived, built, and deployed in the same time it used to take to do the analysis. Today we'll visit the quantitative and qualitative return. We'll talk about avoiding analysis paralysis. We want to also talk through some key dependencies and factors for realizing return on your mobile app projects. In addition, we'll touch on some of the BYOD, a common question, and I'll sprinkle in some samples and case studies and stories as we go. So with that, I'd like to jump directly into, let me see if I can do this here. Directly into what is a typical ROI for a mobile app. And like I said before, mobile app costs are a fraction of what the legacy enterprise applications or initiatives would be. So it's not impossible and actually quite common to see 20x returns, 20-time returns easily on some of the mobile app initiatives that we're seeing today. But before we jump into it's 20x or 30x or 200%, whatever, let's define the type of return you would expect. So here's the basic challenge. We run into a quantitative return. This is the how many dollars, how much savings. In the past history, the legacy applications, these can be paralyzing. Getting into monster spreadsheets and calculations for the quantitative down to the how many dollars we're going to make or save. The converse of that is the qualitative return. So more, we'll say the softer return, and sometimes called vague. But there's a lot of opportunity here in both sides, and let's talk to it real quick. So on the revenue side, the ability for, and we'll take a mobile tack with this, the revenue side. So net new revenue through the mobile channels. We're also thinking revenue retention. So these are customers and existing customers and revenue chains, and we want to make sure that we don't see any attrition with that. And then, of course, revenue increase. So this would be customer penetration or maybe a bigger share of the wallet of our existing customer base. Those are the typical, quantitative type returns we would see. Conversely, the cost side. So we would see cost avoidance. So maybe in the mobile world, we would be able to avoid legacy or monster system upgrades, or maybe postpone enhancements, possibly gain some efficiencies and effectiveness through a mobile channel or new mobile capabilities, and postpone new hires. On the savings side, basically we're looking to take time out of business processes, so able to go better, faster, cheaper, if you will. If we take a look around the counterclockwise here, so satisfaction, typically this is more of a qualitative. So we have happier customers, we have happier partners and employees. And I want to talk through a little bit about, there's real numbers, even though we call it qualitative, to have a happier customer or employee. But there's some real numbers, second order impacts to this we'll talk about. Around regulatory and compliance, some of these are tough to prove as far as an ROI, but the penalties for not being compliant can be detrimental and possibly business ending in some industries. So the regulatory and compliance, the return is quantitative, but it goes the other way quickly if you're not compliant. Customer retention is a net, as a second order result also, the satisfaction and brand recognition. So the mobile channel gives us an opportunity now to provide and create an impression. So the brand now in the hands of a talented salesperson or field service person, able to one-on-one share information with the customer. You can picture an insurance industry the insurance agent coming out with a binder and papers falling everywhere versus the put together, I have an iPad and I'm flipping through and I'm able to look up your information and do quotes and all that, very neat and put together. That brand now becomes, and that experience becomes part of the brand. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time and break down each of the quantitative and the qualitative discussions. So we'll call it a classic model, quantitative. So we're looking for a large benefit. We want that top number, the numerator over denominator. We're looking for the benefit. We want to impact the largest number possible. The denominator, the bottom, we're looking for the cost to deliver. So immediately in a mobile space, we have an advantage on the denominator. The cost to deliver a mobile app, again, a fraction. So knowing that the inception through deployment of a mobile app is just a fraction of what a typical enterprise project would be, now what we want to do is make sure that we retain that competitive advantage, maintain a lower cost to deliver on the mobile side, and hopefully be able to impact from a benefit of the largest number possible. Since it's a percent, immediately the bottom number goes smaller. Our ROI immediately, even if we're still just attacking $1 million benefit, what could be a $500,000 CRM project is now, a $50,000 app project, just to give you orders of magnitude here. So immediately we have an opportunity. With the benefits in the millions, costs potentially in the tens of the thousands, this calculation becomes less about the quantitative detail, the numbers and decimals, and more about the strategic direction. We do also want to understand that there's a qualitative piece, and I mentioned before a second order impact. So oftentimes when we look at the ROI, the return, we're looking maybe for brand recognition, ease of use, process simplification. So all of these feed into, we'll call it adoption and retention, ease of use. But if we apply that adoption, retention, ease of use conversation to very complicated business processes that maybe are that veer from the standardization, we immediately begin to impact maybe some savings. So if we can simplify a complex process, increase the adoption around the process, our quality goes up, our timelines come down, and immediately, even though it's a qualitative calculation or assumption, we're immediately able to affect, again, that bottom number and drive the cost down. So when we're looking at quantitative, qualitative, all these impact areas, how do we avoid getting stuck? So now that we have a broader view of the return, how do we avoid that analysis paralysis, knowing that that's basically our enterprise legacy? Everything we have and every metric we have in the enterprise today for project approvals and PMOs and all the funnels that we have to try to get a project into the priority list. It's all metrics around enterprise legacy and the dollars and the quantitative ROI. So how do we avoid that analysis paralysis? The easiest way and the most simple way is to find the areas that are no-brainers. So let's find that largest number. We don't need to analyze every metric. And I'll give you some very good examples of areas where we found these large numbers. The takeaway here for the bottom below the line, mobile apps don't need to be large, expensive, or complicated to have a great return. That's a key takeaway. So knowing that the benefits, the top line, were in the millions, we can impact hours in the hundreds of thousands, and resource touch points. We can easily touch, with a single app, touch thousands of employees. Those are some very large numbers, and if we can create adoption and adherence to some simplification processes with a very cheap app, net is we have a huge return. Okay, so let's understand which of the large numbers we can impact within the enterprise. And again, this is the top line, the benefit side. So here's 4 common areas we run into around the sales reps. So if we're able to, and all of us, in the enterprise, we have tons of BI, and we're able to get our hands on a lot of this information, but it becomes a little too much to take a look at sometimes. So if we simplify it and we're looking at from a sales rep perspective, let's take the total head count, break it down into an average revenue, break that down into orders per rep for existing customers and new customers, get a quick loaded cost per sales rep, and then an average cost of sales by order. So with a very quick, division and separation of where the money is going and where the cost is going for the sales reps, very quickly it'll jump out to us what big numbers we can affect. So if we have a total head count, if we have thousands of sales folks, if we have an average cost of sales by order, and we can figure out which order type and which lead, which sales lead are driving the loaded costs, very quickly those big numbers can pop out. We'll be able to figure out if that's a big number that we can affect with a new mobile scenario, new mobile capabilities, some efficiencies or effectiveness conversations. The other side of the box here is the revenue. So if we look at the total revenue, and this is annuity, flow revenue, and the business just comes to us, there's new revenue, we're selling hard and earning new customers and new revenue, and then there's loss, there's attrition. Customers will either spend less or defect. So understanding where we are with the revenue, where our revenue sources are, leads to orders, to order attrition, to a cost per lead and a margin. Very quickly we can get to, again, we can see the big numbers, revenue versus margin on an orders and leads. So if there is a large amount of attrition between a lead to order, or if the order revenue revenue per order is a large magnitude, and all we have to do is gain a few more orders if it's large revenue numbers, and we can do that with a very simple or cheap app, that becomes a ripe target for us in the mobile scenarios. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with the rest, but basically customers. So if we're looking total number of customers, and we can look at the demographics and customer growth or attrition, again, large numbers, we can impact that fairly easily knowing the sales reps and the customer-facing roles. And the last piece is time study. It's one of the more common places we're looking to take time out of the business or shorten processes. One of the favorites we've run into is paper. So areas where we're capturing, we spend time listening to the information, recording the information on paper. That paper goes back to a system. That system gets keyed in. That keyed in data now goes to another process, and it gets distributed through the enterprise. And I have an example on that here in the next slide. But that becomes a very appetizing area for the mobile space. You have an always-on, always connected device with the role, the field service or salesperson, whatever. But that becomes a rich area where we can capture information quickly, avoid the whole paper trail, and immediately get it digital and into the process. We also want to understand how much information is being created. So is this an opportunity for us to shorten the cycle for content creation, or is this consumed? So is this a lean back? We need a better way to distribute maybe a standard operating procedure. So if SOPs are created and distributed monthly, there's cost takeout for printing the paper, there's cost takeout for keeping it updated, and there's a high risk area where if they're not using the right version of the SOP, and we can affect that directly with mobile, get it to the right person, the right place at the right time. There's a huge cost savings opportunity for us there. So the net here, we're looking for these large numbers. These are just 4 different buckets we can look in. There's 15 more at the very least, but that large numerator is really where we're shooting. Okay, so I told you I had an example around the paper process. So in a real life scenario, I've been asked to protect, there's some IP here and some competitive advantage that I want to try to protect also as I'm giving these stories out. But these are true stories rooted and genericized, just so we can talk about it in detail. This paper process, there was a week-long process capturing literally a flip chart, capturing on paper. The paper notes will be taken, go back to the office, captured, digital system. Throughout the whole week, there was a week end of week visit back with where the information was captured in a review, discussion, action items taken, etc. So the benefits out of this, the net was an iPad, and instead of typing these notes, it's selection of comments, it's yes, no's, it's approvals, rejection of status. So now what used to take a span of a week, it took basically minimum 5 hours a week per user, and there were thousands of users using this scenario. So now, 5 hours times 1,000. What this now let them do, there's some time savings here, and that's okay. You can calculate that out. But now it let them spend the time on the critical tasks and the coaching. So under the qualitative, not only did it save the company money, but there was improved compliance. So now they were able to document the task, complete the task, the accuracy improved, and they were able to provide immediate coaching and feedback to the employees. The managers were able to provide immediate feedback to the employees, make adjustments, and even before the tasks were assigned in the system, it's approved, acknowledged by the employee right there on the spot. And when the manager walks out, that task is done. There's not homework when he or she gets back to the office. There's not another entry step, and on to the next location. So immediately, the paper, the digital opportunity, the mobile opportunity gives us a huge ROI, both quantitative and qualitative. The second piece here is just identify areas of the business. So, when we think through what roles, which processes, which scenarios, where can we go find repetitive activities that a lot of people are doing? It's important to understand when we go in, the cost of an app is the same, whether this app is being downloaded and used by 10 people or 1,000 people. Our return accumulates by scaling the benefits across the roles. So whether I roll it out to one region and 10 district managers, or 100 regions, and now I'm attacking or approaching 1,000 district managers, the application cost is the same. The distribution costs are free, basically, in the app world. So we want to understand, again, we're going after big numbers, a lot of people in the role, and a lot of process, time spent on a common process. These common processes also give us economy of scale. So if it's a process and it's a question answer, if it's a personal review, if it's a store audit, if it's a warehouse inventory, all of these are basic, entry of yes, no. Is this what was supposed to be? Is it actual? Yes, no. So a lot of these processes lend themselves to efficiencies and, maybe slight tweaks between the apps, but understanding what those are and how many times that process is used. We can also look at simplification. So in a lot of the enterprise processes, there's a lot of convoluted steps where we go to one system to find an ID. That ID then gets keyed into another system for reuse, and we do a lookup, and with that data we do something else. So now, without having to do a lot of expensive changes to legacy, back-end systems and integration and things, we can think through a mobile facade. So now the mobile, again, quick, cheap, fast, easy to do. We can grab the legacy data and present it in a mobile facade and span multiple systems, shorten the workflow without the big expensive legacy costs to change or modify the back-end systems. Okay. So again, another example on this one would be around some work orders. So monster work order system, think of it on a factory floor. Every time there's a requisition or every time there's a new piece or part or tool or something that's needed, it's a work order. So, and they are typically large, expensive, and difficult to change. So just by simply providing a mobile front end to do quick approvals, quick rejections, and quick orders, there was a long list of things that were commonly done. So again, a lot of people doing what is a repeatable process. We were able to take a look and understand, here's the touch points, here's the opportunity, and it was a very large number. What this did for the users as far as satisfaction, Now they can approve the work orders without having to run back to the desk and get on the computer and log in and do, click through and find and search and do all the fields. This now put this on a mobile device. So while they were in transit between factory facilities or walking across the warehouse floor, they're able to take a quick look, scan down, understand how many work orders are in their queue. The easy ones, click them off. The more difficult ones, if it takes evaluation, they can just do those 2 or 3 when they get back to the desk and not be required to do all of the work orders in the queue. So the net, the quantitative, it reduces the time to approval, especially for critical purchases. They can move it through the system in minutes and less than an hour now versus multiple days when people get back to the desk and office to do the approvals. And there was a cost avoidance, a huge cost avoidance. There was no major enterprise system updates required, only the light mobile facade. From a qualitative standpoint, it shifted the approval task to a more convenient time. So instead of, and preserved their critical and important and expensive desk time. Ease of use meant adoption, meant work orders, and process adherence. So instead of doing ad hoc purchases, the work order system use went up, which meant that the company was able to take advantage of the bulk purchasing arrangement they had, and it wasn't done as spot orders or local purchase orders. So our number 3, take advantage of sunk cost or the existing investments. So multiple projects will have been deployed. Phones have been purchased or managed corporately, under a BYOD or a corporate liable. Phones, tablets. This now becomes a sunk cost. So if there was a project that went ahead of us, or if there's 2 or 3 projects in our portfolio, we can take a look at splitting that cost. So the net effect is the reduction of that bottom line again. So instead of having to buy 100 iPads, if I'm one project that needs an iPad and there's 5 projects, now I'm only taking 20% of that cost on it as part of my investment. So understand that these devices are commonly used and commonly needed for multiple different business scenarios. So let's think in terms of reusability and leverage the existing investments. So when we're looking through this scenario and we find these large numbers that we can impact, the next filter we want to put on are, do they already have devices? Are they using corporate phones? Are they using approved devices that are enterprise hardened? Or will they be? Are there other projects in line that will help us offset some of the initial costs, the corporate costs? And it doesn't matter whether it's a corporate, this is a biggie, and we'll get to this on the BYOD conversation, but it doesn't matter whether it's a corporate liable phone, a personal liable phone, a bring your own, a choose your own. We're just looking to see if they have a device that we can leverage for our scenario. The other takeaway here, and the caution, more device types makes it more difficult to recover the cost. So what I mean is, if we're going to deliver a work order application and we know that iPhones are what all of the floor managers are using, that's one app across the sunk cost of the iPhones. If it's an iPhone and an Android and some tablets and a mix of things, it becomes more difficult to recoup that cost, because now it's a Java app on an Android device, it's an Xcode app on an iOS device, and now our cost, our bottom line, begins to grow as we start to try to serve against more device types. So that's the caution for that one. We also want to understand and leverage existing integration. Integration could be one of the higher costs when we're doing mobile. Integration is, I need to do authentication and security secure login back into the home system. I may need HR data or financial data or CRM data, customer data, or ERP, legacy or shipping or orders or whatever. If those exist, then again, our bottom line cost begins to go down. If we're able to create integrations and pull information in that other systems need or other apps will need, now again, we begin to be able to share that cost, and we need to think in terms of building it generically enough that it's not just for this app or not for just this project, but now we're able to pull back customer information, phone number, address, contact details in any application across the enterprise, whether it's the legacy applications or the mobile applications, should be able to reuse that. Most enterprise systems have something in place today, a services bus, a services hub. So knowing what you have, that also becomes a filter for being able to return, increase your return on any mobile app. And then the last piece here around reusability is the actual mobile applications themselves. So understanding what mobile libraries you own, you've purchased, or you're using. There's design time involved with these widgets and modules and third-party assets. Examples may be a calendar widget or module, mapping functions that you would pull in and use, maybe a photo management application. So rather than having 3 applications and each of them have a photo and mapping capability, build that as a function that can be reused on each application. Now it reduces your overall design, implementation, and testing time. You're using a function or a mobile component that's been tested and proven in an application. Again, your design costs go down, and your overall application cost goes down, and your risk goes down as you're able to reuse these modules. Okay. Out of this, I'd like to do just one more example here in line. So this is enhancing the sales capability. So we're talking about sunk costs. We're talking about a project that went in front of us that took iPads. So this is a sales role. They needed some iPads. They wanted to be able to put their sales content, marketing brochures, and literature on an iPad and have a digital content that they can flip through easily. That project partially justified the iPad purchases, but behind that, there was, I think, 3 projects total that was going to go against the iPad purchase. But the second project actually paid for the remainder of the initiative because what it was doing was it was shortening the sales cycle. The return on this alone, since the iPads were a sunk cost, and we knew that was the platform, we have one platform to build for, and we know the role specifically that we're doing and the scenario that we need to fulfill. The scenario was a 3-visit sales cycle that we could reduce to 2 visits. It also shortened the sales window and removed the opportunity for competitors to enter and create a competitive bid and spin out the process. The application scenario also had a mini pricing calculator, if you will, a quoter. So as the scenario shortened, the visits shortened, the sales reps were actually able to answer and address customer objections with real-time quotes, and customer was able to sign off on the opportunity, the bill right there. So in detail, the average number of visits, initially it was an initial visit, a review of opportunity, and then they would come back with a quote. What it turned into then was 2 visits, with the initial visit, understanding what the customer wanted. When the sales rep came back out, they had the content they needed. They were able to review, quote, adjust the quote, and getting the approval all in that second meeting. The cost of sales, again, we're talking hundreds of sales reps and approaching millions of dollars in deals. The sales cycle reduced over 30% and the win rate increased. So now it's net new revenue faster. From a qualitative standpoint, again, there was a second-order impact here that helped the bottom line. The customer engagement, it was more productive. It turned into a high-value relationship and repeat business. So being easy to do business with became an opportunity also for the salesperson to revisit and extend into new products that they hadn't actually sold that customer before. The shorter sales cycle also meant that each of the sales reps could deal with and handle more opportunities. So all that's good. So I think if we back up now and say, so where do we start? So these are all good, and some common sense, and some what mobile brings to the table is, you know, a bigger difference on the cost versus the benefit. We want to just take one more lens and talk about risk. So not only are we looking for high numbers of benefits that we can affect, a lower cost of entry, but the risk. So the ideal candidates fall in the low risk. This is non-critical, non-sensitive, non-confidential data, the access, the secure access, and the device count. Again, we want to make sure we're very focused on the types of scenarios we're going to feed. We still want to go after the high business values, still looking for that big number, but we also want to layer in the readiness. Lower risk initiative means that it's an established process and the business is ready to adopt. And of course, the lower technical complexity. That talks to and speaks to the integration. So if we have to go to 15 systems to pull one piece of information to fulfill the scenario, it probably isn't one of our lower risk, easier wins. So the low technical complexity, again, talks to a focused application, a focused device set, and more on-device and less legacy integrations. So that risk looks like, and one of the points earlier was we don't have to analyze everything. So what we've done in the past and what I would recommend is creating your list of scenarios. These become your mobile app opportunities. So what might be a single app idea, quickly as you look at the opportunities to move big numbers, easily becomes 100+ scenarios. These scenarios you can then business stack rank. So out of the scenarios there will be touch points to larger numbers than others. That top 10% then becomes your target. So instead of trying to do a risk analysis or an opportunity analysis across every scenario, stack rank the ones that have the higher readiness and factor in the lower risk. So which assets? Is it, again, sensitive, critical information, or is it more publicly available or less sensitive? And then the risk of breach. So if it's a medium sensitive access, risk of breach is low, it gives us a high opportunity, high readiness, and becomes one of our leading candidates for a high ROI and quick turn. So now we have qualitative and quantitative. We're addressing the risk, and now we want to talk through a little bit of the dependencies. So the ROI dependencies, again, top line, we really want to go after the well-defined roles in the user experience. We want to understand if it's a sales scenario, if it's a service scenario, if it's a warehousing scenario, what roles are involved and what is the actual user experience. The biggest dependency, and the one I will pound on here shortly, is this is not a requirements list. We don't sit in the conference room and come up with a requirement of what the app should do. This should be a day in a life. There's a shadow. There's understanding exactly what's occurring, where the opportunity lives for the mobile. Again, if we have devices in the scenario, it's already a sunk cost. That increases our top line, and we're looking at low data risk with a highly mature process. So all of these, again, we're attacking big numbers for that top line. All of those dependencies quickly gets us to our leading candidates. Below the line, again, we're trying to reduce the cost. We want a small number here. The high impact roles, so the more users, again, it costs the same amount to build an app. So if we deploy the app to 10 people, our cost for delivery is quite expensive. But that same app deployed across 1,000 users, our cost of delivery gets diluted fairly quickly. Now we have a very good opportunity for a high return. Across the board, invest in a prototype. So as we understand the day in a life scenarios, test it. And invest in a quick prototype, do a click-through, make sure that makes sense, and make sure that you're focused on the devices rather than trying to solve the same problem on a Windows device and a BlackBerry and an Android and an iOS and a tablet, whatever. Your ROI happens faster and is more straightforward if we're device focused. And of course, we talked about the reuse of integration. So the dependency here would be you can fulfill a very complicated scenario if you've got integrations and components that you can reuse. One of our last topics here is the BYOD. So we're asked this a lot. So, is it cheaper to do apps and deliver scenarios through BYOD? And the answer is it depends. So here's the dependencies. Again, we're still talking about the numerator. We're still looking at the very large number, and BYOD isn't a factor. So these devices and how we're managing, we said earlier, it doesn't matter whether it's a corporate device or a personal device, bring your own, choose your own. You know, the benefit, we're still looking to target our large user base, our large dollars, our large time. Where the BYOD starts to become a factor is the cost to deliver. And this is very industry specific and honestly customer and policy specific. So in your BYOD world, I'd try to put some samples in here. So the fixed cost to deliver under the BYOD, if the devices come with a stipend, so we give you X dollars per device rather than the corporate capital cost, we have to factor in what the stipend would be. We need to factor additional device types. So oftentimes the BYOD has a list. You can bring in Android certain versions and certain models, and iOS certain versions and models. So as that list begins to grow now, we've talked about it earlier, that you lose focus and it becomes more difficult to get a return building an app across multiple devices, just because it takes a Java app on one, an Xcode app on another, etc. Those additional operating systems, basically, that's what we just talked about. But you do get a reduction in capital costs. So you're not in the business of handling hardware and phones. You're also not in the business of managing the bills and the expenses related to it, and of course, it's support and maintenance. So there's the BYOD on the fixed cost. There's some additions depending on policy, whether you're paying the stipend. But immediately you do see some capital cost reduction and some savings, which makes potentially your bottom line, your bottom number smaller. And of course, there's variable costs. So again, depending on policy, this is the usage component. So if you're doing roaming, if you're reimbursing for international, those types of things. Again, the app costs rise for each device type. So if we're doing 3 apps, iOS plus Android plus, and then each operating system. You also need to think through security architecture. You need to tighten it up a little bit on a BYOD. Now you need, application containers, data containers. You're managing your corporate asset on a non-corporate device. So the applications and the security around that needs to be heightened. So that cost needs to be included. But there is definitely a savings around depot. So you're not going to have to store and house extra parts and pieces and devices and whatnot. So the BYOD does save you money on the variable cost for that. So those are some of the factors that go in. Again, that top line benefit, we're targeting that regardless. The cost to deliver is where the BYOD, the bottom line number, can actually, and as you can see, can actually raise on some of these cost to deliver. So as I kind of wrap up here, I do want to share, there was an innovation use case that hit us not too long ago, and it was a net new capability using mobile. So we've talked about efficiencies, we've talked about shared devices, but this ability, this is an industry where they needed a better way to communicate, and it was driving. So there were maps and driving instructions and who to contact and what actions to take at different sites, etc. And it was very difficult. There was a lot of tribal knowledge. So the tribal knowledge occurs that as I'm very familiar with my route, my truck, my customers, it's easy for me to be very efficient in the day and and spend 7 hours doing an 8-hour route. The challenge came in when I was on vacation. So the substitutes and backups incurred a lot of overtime because they didn't necessarily know who to talk to, what actions to take on the site, the most efficient way to do the route. They didn't know the nuances of the business, basically. And there was always an attempt to keep paper, Post-its, recordings. There was a lot of things attempted. But the net new capability that this gave us was basically a iPad application that gave us one place to keep it. So now it's portable. It doesn't have to be vehicle mounted. It's portable. It can transition between drivers and temps. The net savings was over 270,000 overtime hours due to the extended workday. and that's missed sites and revisits, and that is inefficient routing. That there was a lot that went into those overtime hours. The second order was the fuel and vehicle maintenance costs. There's just less miles and less fuel spent being efficient. The qualitative side of this was the customer satisfaction. So, you know, it was a first call. The customer didn't care if it was the original driver or a substitute. They just wanted the service. So now the employee and substitute driver efficiency and satisfaction improved. The customer satisfaction improved, and there was a central management for directions and eliminated confusion. So if there was a new routes and new stops and new customers added, there was a place to add it and manage it centrally. Again, all portable, iPad, take it to one truck, take it to the other, it didn't matter. All these could be cross-referenced. So, I mean, the numbers are real on this. So, you know, a mobile app that costs less than $100,000 with 270,000 overtime hours, the financial savings was just alone in just overtime hours alone was over $3 million. And if you do the math, $3 million over 100K, you can begin to understand the magnitude that the mobile world gives us as far as being able to affect the ROI. You also layer in some efficiencies around the fuel, truck maintenance and cost, and just efficiencies en route, and that number goes well above $3 million. Okay, so we've covered our list of topics, and there's one consideration I see in the notes. There is a huge driver for needing to do day in a life scenario, converting that day in a life scenario to a prototype, validating the prototype. We've seen a lot of applications built in requirements from a conference room that don't necessarily meet reality. So what we want to recommend is day in a life, looking at the business scenarios, prioritizing lower risk, higher volume, and then prototype that, validate the scenario, and that drives your adoption. There was a question earlier around what kind of adoption, how do we retain the adoption? Basically, it's simplification and ease of use. If it's something that needs to be done, it's simple to do, and it's convenient for the users, they will return. The adoption will happen based on the ease of use. How do we get there? On the left side, we start with the benchmarking. So we understand the business drivers, there's a competitive analysis, there's this creation of ideas, this ideation leads to these mobile scenarios. Before we start putting filters on, these are big numbers, before we start putting filters on, this is the cost. We want to understand what areas of the business we see mobile scenarios that are valid for. Once we have that list, that then gives us the opportunity to start paring down and applying the filters. This middle step here, where we start talking about the application prototype, we want to apply the high benefit to low risk and the more ready, more mature processes. High volume of touch points, so it's either a high dollar impact, a high time impact, a large number of roles, a common process. So all of those make it through the filter, and we have our leading candidate for the app prototype. That app roadmap then leads us into what will be the development approach. So who's involved, and the enterprise architecture teams get involved, and through the planning and budgeting process, we get to a build and deploy. So this is the most common scenario around understanding all your mobile opportunities from the list of scenarios and tying that back into and prototyping your lead candidate and validating your business case. So in wrap up, I'm going to turn it back over to Eric here in a second. I just want to highlight some of the findings and some of the recommendations out of here. We really want to create our scenario list or mobile opportunities. We want to filter on the high numbers, so high dollars, a lot of hours, number of people, common processes. Consider the risk and readiness, and then do the prototype. The day in the life prototype is critical, and then plan for the full build and deploy. We've discussed a lot of the just basic principles of ROI today, but the new mobile fundamentals I wanted to bring to the table basically lowered the cost of entry. It's game-changing for realizing ROI in the mobile space. First order, second order impacts across the board. There's a clear quantitative and qualitative return in revenue, in savings, in brand, in accuracy, adoption, simplification, adherence to process, and net new business capabilities. So we saw in this example, the ROI, it was not attainable. That process would not have fit in a laptop. So net new business capabilities using the mobile channel. I'd like to thank you for attending today. Hopefully you found some information in here useful. I'd like to turn it back over to Eric for some wrap-up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Larry. And just as a follow-up to Larry's conversation and his last slide in terms of the process, that process and some of the structure around in terms of identifying some of the high-level use cases, being able to drive them through that prototyping process, being able to work back towards that ROI is part of this mobile app scoping and planning kickstart that we perform for our clients. Really, when we start looking at a more of a concrete and usable set of use cases in a specific area, we use these scoping and planning kickstarts to really understand how would that actually work. One other thing I wanted to follow up with, and just back to Larry's previous or his last example, the innovative use case in terms of some of the use cases in trucks and things like that. The funny thing about that, also about that example, is that it was something that we found through one of those day-in-the-life scenarios. The executive team thought the use case was somewhere else, and they thought there was another area to be able to use mobility to be able to go after some return, and that was a conference room decision. We pushed to be able to be in the truck, so we donned the uniforms of this organization. We sat in the trucks for a few days and watched how these drivers used information and used the devices that they were using, and came back with this type of use case to be able to drive that. And so a lot of times, back to Larry's concrete point around innovation and use, it's very difficult sometimes to really understand where the benefit would be from the corporate office, and it really makes sense to get your feet dirty, so to speak, and get out and be in the environment a little bit. And so we've used that in many different types of clients and locations. Just from we have just about 7 minutes left. I have time for a few different questions. As an offer here, we do a lot of kind of free 1-hour mobile advisory calls, and just some things to be able to get deeper in these examples. We could share a little bit more in terms of who these clients are, and talk a little bit more about some of the challenges at a deeper level. Walk through some of our tools that we use to be able to discuss and develop ROI. Walk you through some of the process, and even talk a little bit more in terms of some of the challenges you guys are facing, and if there's ways for us to be able to assist you in that in some sort of way. Larry, just in terms of a couple questions. We had some good ones, and maybe just going back to one of the first things you mentioned around the N over D equation. Gino asks, what's the adequate ratio of cost versus benefit to determine if a use case or app makes sense? Is there a ratio today that really exists, or what are organizations kind of looking at?
Well, I guess in most of the financial groups that we run into, they're looking for at least, in the mobile space, at least a four-time cost return. So in legacy, in a BI world, you'd spend maybe $1 million and try to get back 4 or 5. That's kind of where that's coming from. In mobile, we're easily able to blow away any of their low-end expectations. They're 4 or 5x return on investment, and they'll usually span that over 4 or 5 years. In mobile, and one point I didn't make in here, thanks for asking the question. In mobile, the time to begin getting the return is much shorter. So in a BI or CRM or legacy project, the project implementation may take a year or 2, and you don't see return until year maybe 3 or 4. In mobile, these projects are 2 and 3 months, and you begin seeing return the very next month typically. So that return then accumulates. So by the time you get to 1 or 2 years out, that return is hundreds of times the return, instead of where the typical life cycle of a large enterprise class project would be return in year 3. We're still returning in months later.
And Larry, just kind of continuing that in a separate question, there's a couple questions related to, from this talk, you spent, there's a good amount of time in here dedicated towards employee-facing apps, and even some of the ones that we walk through are either employee-facing or B2B type of focused. At a high level, are there some major differences in terms of customer use apps and the ROI calculations that we use to be able to develop for customer use? And to follow up on that last question you just mentioned, or I just asked, is there a difference in terms of what that acceptable ratio is for customer-facing apps versus employee apps?
Yeah, we're still seeing a lot of measurements. That the ratio is a magic number, but it hasn't been tweaked yet to the types of potential numbers we can see in mobile. So again, mobile easily blows away the lower number, of what that would be, at a 10x number easily. As far as the consumer-facing apps, that's a fantastic question. There's different revenue. There's definitely a different revenue model on a consumer-facing app. It could be marketing funded. It could be, cost of app store, 99 cents or $2 or whatever for the enterprise. You can spend. There's packages. I'm going to toss out a name like OmniGraffle. You'll spend a couple $100 on a mobile app around an OmniGraffle or an enterprise class tool. There's also in-app fees. So when we begin to look at iTunes, Google Play, customer facing, there's a revenue stream up front. There's a revenue stream with marketing embedded in, and the extension to that then becomes it's another channel for our customers to do business with us. So if it becomes possibly a cheaper channel, so rather than phone calls into a call center, it now competes with web time, and it gets your business out to more folks. So the revenue or the ROI is a little more difficult to touch on that, but the net is you want to give your customers a new channel and easier to do business with. Great.
One last question, similar to that and kind of following up on the customer-facing ROI. Gino also asked, he's supporting B2B type of use cases, and one of the limitations that the executive team has introduced as a requirement in terms of mandating we understand the ROI for a specific customer or company to be able to enable some paper-based forms to move to mobile. Typically, when you're looking at customer base and say B2B and things like this, are you doing the ROI and kind of justifying it based on the returns from a specific company and a specific example of that company, or are companies aggregating and kind of trying to be able to take more of a best guess and kind of estimate approach towards those?
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit in here, but that's a good point. It's possible to generate an application and fulfill a business scenario with a customer, but again, your ROI comes from using that app. So the cost of the app is fixed, and whether you use it for one customer or 100 customers, if you're able to use it for 100 customers, your ROI instantly goes to 100x. So I would recommend, maybe. We can probably take that maybe as a separate call, Eric, and kind of talk through that a little more detail. But I would recommend, broadening the model beyond a given customer, and you can make some assumptions that there's like customers. You can make assumptions that there's 10% or 20% differences between customers, and that would be an additional cost on a per customer basis. But I would strongly recommend extending, going after the larger base. The top number benefit, if you will.
Thanks, Larry. So it's about 2 o'clock. I wanted to thank everyone for joining. As I mentioned before, the slides from this presentation as well as a recording of this will always be made available. It'll probably hit our website tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on when WebEx gives us that file. We do these every month on a bunch of topics, and if you go to Propelics.com and click on the resources link, there's about 15 hours of good webinar content up there in a whole variety of areas related to enterprise mobile strategy and delivering valuable use cases out to your employees and partners and customers. For that, Larry, thank you for your time.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you, everyone, for joining, and we will see you next time.